Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friends Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
Richard and Michael like to debate and deliberate the Mount Rushmore of any topic they choose. And this week, they are going to be debating the Mount Rushmore of OMG visual effects scenes in movies. But they are enlightened, and they are inspired, and they love movies, and they love effects films. But they are not knowledgeable experts. And because we wanted a knowledgeable expert, we brought in a gentleman who is a journalist in the visual effects industry. He's been covering the effects industry for quite some time, effects and animation. He writes for publications including Cartoon Brew, VFX Voice, 3D Artist, 3D World, Sci-Fi Movie Maker, Thrillist, and his own website, which I've been following since its inception, Befores and Afters. You can follow him on Iain at Iain Fails on Twitter and Instagram. Please welcome Iain Fails. How are you today, sir?
Good, Jeff. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a delight. Iain, I have to own up that I'm a fanboy of yours. I love the writing that you do on visual effects. My wife watches HGTV, and she loves home makeover shows. Well, I love cinematic makeovers where you see the raw ingredients that is captured through the lens or comes from a performance or exists on a motion capture stage. We've all seen those people in tights with the ping pong balls all over them. And then you see how it is assembled and how a team of artists, not just technicians, brings it together to create a story that impacts us emotionally. So I love how you are able to tell us why those artists are important and how they work together and how their work is very interesting. How long have you been covering this type of industry?
I feel like I've been covering it for a long time, but it's not super long. About 2010, I started doing it professionally, but I did start when the era of blogs was just becoming a big thing. Start by making my own blog in about 2001, and just doing it as an extra thing to my real daytime job. And then in 2010, I quit my real job and became a visual effects journalist, just sort of overnight.
Your real job was a lawyer, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Crazy change.
What did your family or girlfriend think about that?
Well, I don't think my parents are very happy still.
Okay.
But no, it was the best thing I ever did. I loved it, and I haven't looked back. And as you say, I just love looking behind the scenes at all this stuff. I come at it from a real fan as much as like looking at it professionally as well. And I still get amazed by what I see out there in film and television and games and virtual production and everything like that as well.
Yeah, well, that's cool. It's nice that you could still be interested in it after many years of covering it. So let's just jump right in, if you don't mind. So it is the Mount Rushmore of OMG VFX scenes in films. And give us your first choice, Iain.
My first choice is Bullet Time from The Matrix.
Oh, wow, cool.
It's also on our list.
Oh, right on, great.
Yeah. Probably a very obvious one, but no matter how much I still rewatch that film, and particularly that main dodging bullet sequence on the rooftop that Neo goes through, I still kind of marvel at how that was done, and that it still fits in so well with the filmmaking as well. Lots of, we might talk about this later on, but lots of visual effects sequences sometimes are a little bit too standalone. I've always felt like Bullet Time absolutely works in the schema of that whole film and that whole world that the Wachowskis had created.
Well, what I liked about it was that they kind of teased it at the very beginning of the film with what's her name?
Trinity.
She kind of they do the same sort of camera work, the kind of camera array spinning thing on her, but it's shot in the dark and you're not quite sure what you saw, and by the time you get to like a full daylight rooftop thing, and they kind of explain how he can manipulate time and kind of manipulate, be faster than the computers, it all starts to just coalesce into like this amazing moment where he almost gets it. He almost gets away with it, and he still, gets shot. But like the way that they kind of represent time slowing down or someone being faster than time or something, whatever that interpretation through those visual effects, I think was just so perfectly done.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree. You won't find any other podcast where mentioning Keanu Reeves will get you so much credit right out the bat. So, and dodging a bullet as he did. Let me ask you this: Do you find is there something you can put your finger on in terms of what made it so compelling? It was a visual that we'd never seen before. I'd never seen anything like it before. But what was it?
Well, I tell you what it is in my mind is that it stayed photoreal. So because of the way they shot it and because of the way they executed it, you never actually felt like you left the building, the roof of the building, or you went somewhere else to make this shot, which of course is not true. They filmed Keanu on a big green screen set with this camera array rig. I think it was 120 cameras. Shooting film, by the way, and they were independently triggered. They had been pre-visualized, which means that it had all been worked out before. And when they had those still images, they were then able to use some relatively fantastical techniques, something called optical flow, to work out the in-betweens of Keanu as he moved around. But it wasn't just that. There was actually a photoreal virtual background side to this as well. So back in 1998 or 99 when they were making the film, it was still really hard to model things photorealistically. And I don't think they ever really attempted to do that. They just used real photography it was actually shot in Sydney, Sydney backgrounds to make those backgrounds photoreal. So what I mean is the scene remained in the film and stayed very photoreal, which I think for an audience makes you know something's going on the screen, but it doesn't take you out of the movie. And as you say, it was some sort of imagery that you'd never really seen before, the time slowing down. But I feel the biggest breakthrough was that you stayed in the movie.
Yeah, who was it? I was listening to Phil Tippett or somebody was talking about CG is the thing that looks real but feels fake, and whereas there are some practical effects you'll see in films that look fake but feels real. You know it's really there and you know it's really happening. I think that effect looked at everything. I bought everything about it, and I will say that. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think something that also stands out about it is that it feels very much like a signature special effect. Like you cannot see that in another film and not think of The Matrix. I know that they've you've seen parodies of it, but you can't see that happen and not be like, oh, I know where that comes from. That came from this thing. And it feels very much like it is so iconic to that specific film and that specific moment that anything else that tries to do something similar is like, they did it already. And I think that's one of the weird things about special effects is so much is built on things that have already been done, and then you're pushing both ways. You're taking all the stuff that's already been done and then also trying to invent something new. And it's basically a lot of it, or not a lot of it, but in part, it's like an idea of like kind of still photography. Well, that's film, I guess. But like, I don't know, there's something that feels that they created something that you've never seen before. And then if you try to recreate it, you're just going to think of that scene or that moment.
Yes, I totally agree. In fact, visual effects supervisors are asked every film, basically, or every time, make us something we've never seen before. But I think in this case, they really did, right?
Yeah. I will say that moment, so when I saw Star Wars in the theater in 1977, it was 22 years later seeing The Matrix and seeing that moment where Keanu and the people around him realize he is the one. I had that same tingle, that moment where Luke realizes he has the Force and he is special and he is the one who is going to be the savior of this ragtag team of rebels and misfits. So, yeah, and I think if that effect wasn't believable, it would pull you out of the movie. It would take you away from the story, getting behind the protagonist, and so that's why it's so successful. Okay, so Richard and Michael chose Bullet Time as well, which means we're going to move on to Richard and Michael, but they'll be sharing what is their second choice for the Mount Rushmore of OMG VFX scenes in films.
Yeah, so I'll go with our second choice, and this one I think is also a pretty obvious. I don't want to say obvious one, but one of the big ones, and that is Jurassic Park, the T-Rex attack scene in night, where it's following the lights. This is one of those movies where it was like Avatar in the sense that you went into it fully knowing you were going to see something that you would, in a way that you had never thought that you would see it before. I mean, there had been dinosaurs in movies going back to almost the invention of movies. And we'd gone through stop motion, primitive CGI, all these different ways to do it. And this just felt different. I remember watching the film and it really having that sense of reality. It really did feel like there were dinosaurs there interacting in a way that animals would interact with actors during a scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember going to see Jurassic Park when I was in high school and being pretty jaded as a high school kid, like thinking, well, I've seen pretty much everything you could see in a movie, and walking out of that and just with my friends just being, can you believe that? That's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Iain, for your book, Iain has a book which is available out on Amazon, Masters of FX. You do profile a gentleman named Phil Tippett in that, and he is kind of renowned for those dinosaurs in that film, unless I'm mistaken. Did you gather any insight? Can you share with us anything?
Yeah, of course. And it's great you mentioned Phil Tippett. He was a big part of that film, but as many people may know, his stop motion dinosaurs were originally what ILM ended up doing. So stop motion was going to be something that Steven Spielberg used in a big way in Jurassic Park, as well as Stan Winston's full-size animatronic dinosaurs. And CG was really only going to be used to integrate them into the film and perhaps do some dinosaur crowds. But once Spielberg saw a test that ILM had done of a CG dinosaur, things just, snowballed. And basically Phil Tippett's stop-motion dinosaurs were no longer part of the film. He stayed on famously as the dinosaur supervisor, which he often gets criticized for because he didn't do a great job of supervising the raptors. But Dennis Muren was the ILM visual effects supervisor in charge of the, mainly the CG work and the overall visual effects supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
But Phil brought what I feel is this movement of dinosaurs approach. He knew how creatures behaved and he was able to input that into a lot of the CG animation.
Mm.
I thought what was so sick. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
I was just going to say there's a lack of herky-jerkiness in the movements of the dinosaurs, as you said, that I think really help heighten the sense of reality with it. I think what we had seen in the past, the ability for the let's say dinosaurs or animals, whatever it had been in the past, to interact with the actors had never really quite been there. You always looked at it and said, wait, is this a map? What are we looking at here? This was the first time where for me that it really felt like there was true interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Michael?
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought that, part of it's just like the filmmaking and the editing of, they cut back and forth so well between the giant models, the giant puppets, and the CGI that it was. I was never quite sure which one was which until you're like watching the making of behind the scenes documentaries that come with the DVDs. Once you get into those, you're like, oh, that one was the puppet, that one was the CGI. Some of them where they're running, obviously, they're not having a puppet run, but like some of the other, like some close-up shots with like the dilation of the eyes, you would have thought might have been like CGI, but those were just real puppets. and just a lot of the things that they just were able to blend the two different disciplines. I thought was, obviously it's amazing. And I don't think the dinosaur movies. I don't think there's been a Jurassic Park movie that's gotten better in terms of how it looks. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember watching the Jurassic World, the first one of the reboot, and thinking, I can see that it's improved. I can see where the money's been spent, but it doesn't feel like it's been improved. I still feel as much of a connection, if not more, to the original Jurassic Park dinosaurs as I do to these wholly CGI productions today.
There's something as well, Michael, on your point about you weren't sure which was practical, which was digital or whatnot. It's really interesting, isn't it, when you go back and watch Jurassic Park from 1993, even though you know that these are practical dinosaurs maybe in that scene and then digital and, it switches between them, I feel like the way, as you say, it was edited and whatnot, you really forgive it. Or you're so sucked into the story that it doesn't matter at all. And in fact, that's a bit of a common theme with practical effects, is that people have this love, I feel, and affinity towards them, that they really, are very happy to have that in the movie. Jaws clearly is a big example of that. That thing looks like a rubber shark, right? But we kind of love it and we don't care. I feel like a little bit the same with Jurassic, even though the practical dinosaurs were brilliantly done.
That is a fun mention, is that Steven Spielberg, who directed, the first blockbuster Jaws, where the shark didn't work most of the time, so he didn't get to show it, and it seems like it went from monster movie to psychological thriller because of the mechanical failures and shortcomings of Bruce the Shark. So can you imagine Spielberg talking with the effects supervisor and saying, "What? I can actually point a camera at this thing? You mean we can actually see the dinosaurs? Oh, I got to re-storyboard this whole movie." Well, cool. That's a cool pull. So what I love about this is that we're getting into and discussing all of these sequences as components of visual storytelling versus effects for their own, for just the sake of blowing something up or showing a spaceship or something like that. They're tools of a visual storyteller and used to elicit emotion and used to elicit an response from an audience. So super cool. So Iain, at this point, you're going to let us know your second choice.
Okay, I might just say that my fourth choice was actually Jurassic Park.
Oh, okay.
The Rotunda end sequence where the T-Rex takes on the raptors. Maybe we can come back to that briefly at the end.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
My number two is probably my favorite visual effects shot of all time, which is the mirror shot in Contact. Now, this is the one where young Ellie realizes her dad has collapsed, and she runs up in a Steadicam move. The Steadicam is running in front of her, up the stairs to the bathroom cabinet. And then somehow it becomes her running towards the bathroom cabinet, realizing you've been watching her in the mirror the whole time. And then she appears, she opens the cabinet and grabs some pills for her father. It's a stunning shot. It's not a huge visual effects shot by any means, but the invisible nature of it is something that's always stayed with me so much over the years. And there's actually a ton of visual effects in Contact, but that one is just one of the most clever ones that I've ever seen. Still don't always know how it's done, even though I've interviewed several times the visual effects supervisor and compositor behind that shot, and I really love it.
Is it because when we see a dinosaur, we don't have one of those in our house, where we all have a mirror in our house? I think those things. We interviewed a practical and makeup effects artist named Dan Crawley, and he was speaking about the challenge of doing an old age makeup as opposed to doing a fantasy creature makeup. None of us have ever met Skeletor, but we all have an older relative, and we can and have met older and aging people before. So the fact that everyone has a mirror such as that in their home and that they did not see the effect coming, that must be one of the reasons why it was so impactful.
I think so. The other reason is it doesn't break. So this is another classic challenge with visual effects shots, is that you're shooting an actor for a scene and then you go to the visual effects shot and it's often a cut. It's often shot on a blue screen. It's often, got some sort of CG in it that looks different than what was shot on set or on the stage. This one, it's absolutely part of the long Steadicam view of young Ellie running to the bathroom cabinet. And even if you watch this shot 20 times in a row, it's almost impossible to see where it starts being her running and starts being the reflection.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? I think we're at our halftime right now, and I'm going to use this opportunity to shill for Iain. Befores and Afters has a blog post about that mirror effect shot in Contact, and it also has a post about the research and pre-visualization done for the bullet time sequence. You can go back and dig deep into some, basically pick your favorite film and go back and look and find some stories about the making of the visual effects. And there was also some retro posts. So we all know that many of the contemporary visual effects are done using computers, and so that has changed from the past where there were all kinds of sets and foreshortening and magical practical effects that were really compelling and interesting. So kind of these days, a lot of it's done in a computer, but it's fun to go back and see some of the retro effects and the practical effects. You can also, since we're at a halftime and we're shilling a little bit, you can also do what I did and go support befores and afters out there on Patreon. I just signed up at the $5 a month level, and I'm already seeing some really cool things. Michael Winfield on our show is a big Star Wars fan, and there is a How They Made Rey and Chewie Sink into the Sand for Rise of Skywalker, which is actually kind of hilarious. Some stuff about how they did that in a surprisingly lo-fi way, DIY kind of way out there in the desert. So that was pretty neat. So
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. So, and while we're at it, I might as well plug myself and our podcast and Richard and Michael. That is the Mount Rushmore podcast. You can join the dialogue of the Mount Rushmore podcast out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You know what? You can actually guide the future of the Mount Rushmore podcast by suggesting a topic. Past suggestors have become guests on the Mount Rushmore podcast. You could also listen to this podcast right now and let us know what your favorite VFX scene is that made you OMG, and post it out on the Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and let us know what we missed. Please do us a solid and download, rate, and review past episodes on your podcast aggregator of choice. We're out there on all of them. And then share it with a friend. It's a great way to let them know about something rad that you like this. So, dudes, it's so rad. It's so rad. So awesome. So we are back. Now we've flipped, so it's Richard and Michael letting us know their third choice.
Well, the third choice that we have is, this is a movie that I just adore. And listen, it's one of the most iconic sequences in movies, and of course that's when Atom in Real Steel is fighting Zeus, and Atom's voice modulator is damaged, and so Hugh Jackman as Charlie has to rely on his visual shadow function. Of course, I'm not talking about that movie. The only special effect in that movie is how they kept an 11-year-old boy in a white tank top.
Yeah,
that seemed very strange.
That's
very strange.
Bizarre.
No, it's a movie I actually do adore and love, and it is strangely another Wachowski movie, which is the final race in Speed Racer.
Oh, fun!
Which is I just rewatched it in preparation for this, and actually when I was thinking of like this topic of OMG, like this is I think the last movie, even though the movie's nearly a decade old, that, or even older, 2009, I think. 2008, 2007, holy shit. Movie where I was like just literally almost crying at the end watching that final race. The way that the racetrack turns into like this checkerboard, psychedelic, kind of comic book animated, reaching this, event horizon level that matches like the retelling of the story so far. I think it comes back to what we were talking about with editing, with the story, with all of it matching up to this one kind of perfect moment for Speed. And I don't know, there's just some aspect of this that was just like visually so delicious to watch on screen, and like something I've never seen. I've seen movies where they've tried to do kind of like a comic book editing, like a comic book style before, that just never quite worked. Like Ang Lee's Hulk, where they tried to do a lot of like paneling. But there's something about Speed Racer and something about this final scene where his journey kind of has a very Luke Skywalker, Star Wars-esque, finding the Force and accomplishing his goal and winning the race, which is, I think, just perfect.
That's a fun pull. I haven't spoken a word about Speed Racer since I saw it in the theater. I have not revisited it, but yeah, it does very much succeed at taking the style of the animated cartoon, which I was a big fan of, and amplifying it and adapting it and honoring its roots, yet making it cinematic for today's audiences. That's a fun pull.
And it's psychedelic, that final sequence you're mentioning. That's like why we go to the cinema. I was just like taken away when that scene happened. And the visual effects, I don't know if he was the overall supervisor, but John Gator also did the Matrix films. And, some of the technology in Speed Racer was advancing the CG, but also using those virtual environments again. Like they had this concept of spherical bubbles. Almost virtual reality things where you could go anywhere in the scene. But yeah, that final sequence was magic, wasn't it? I totally loved it.
I remember I saw this. I never saw the movie, but I did see it because I was at the drive-in watching another movie, and I don't remember the movie, and it wasn't very good, but I was watching. And it was playing on the side at one of the other screens. And I found myself just kind of looking back at it every couple of minutes, and immediately getting drawn into the visuals and the effects and what was happening in the movie. That's all I got.
Okay.
That's it.
All right.
That's my Speed Racer story.
Michael, when you said Speed, as in the first name of Speed Racer, I thought you were going to trigger Iain because he is a Speed super fan, Stan.
Yeah.
Iain, what is it about the film Speed that is so compelling for you?
Well, it came out in 94. I was 16 years old. And I was just getting obsessed with filmmaking. I didn't follow that path until a few years later. But watching Speed, I just realized was such a masterclass in action filmmaking. And then a few years later, when eBay started, I just got on the bandwagon of getting Speed memorabilia from eBay. So I just became obsessive compulsive about getting all the available Speed memorabilia that was possible. And I think I cleared the decks of eBay of this memorabilia. And I still collect it today. And I'm not sure I can really explain it. It's just a weird obsession.
How many pieces of Alan Ruck's clothes do you have from that film?
I've never found any of his.
All right, dudes, let's jump back into it. And am I right or am I right, Iain, you're doing your third choice?
Yes, great.
Okay.
My third, oh my God, visual effects shot is one from Inception, which is the Paris building fold sequence.
Mm-hmm.
I think, again, it's about, for me, being in the cinema, and this film has already been kind of crazy and, well, what's going on? And then these two characters see Paris folding on itself. I don't think we'd seen that kind of thing in any way before. I don't think we'd seen it so photoreal. And then, that sequence goes even further, which is they walk around the city and walk up, vertical streets. And all that kind of stuff. To me, it just was absolute visual effects and storytelling integrated. Plus, it had some really beautiful visual effects, which is done by a company called DNEG, which often do Chris Nolan's films, and they really, really do the invisible effects thing. In fact, they often can't talk about a lot of their work that they've done, say on films like some of the Batman films, or even I'm having a total blank, but the Chris Nolan one with the Dunkirk.
Interstellar.
Yeah, or Dunkirk, yeah. And I'm just sort of obsessed about the way Chris Nolan makes his films, which is that he says outwardly that he doesn't really like CG or visual effects, but in fact he uses it in almost the perfect way, which is just part of the storytelling.
I was watching Doctor Strange, and they sure used that folding building effect.
Yeah.
If it was a kind of it was almost like a parsley on the side of the dish of Inception, and they made the entire steak out of it. Richard and Michael, I think this is your final choice.
It is, and
okay.
It is a movie that we literally just talked about with Inception.
Oh, okay.
The scene that I chose to go with for us is the hallway fight scene.
Oh, yeah.
Being a scene that I remember in a movie that had so many amazing visuals, and you mentioned the Paris folding and things that felt psychedelic or incredibly made something that was unrealistic seem realistic. I think the hallway fight scene in Inception, I think there was a sense of, I don't want to say grittiness to it, but it felt like the fight itself felt like a real fight, which is an amazing thing to actually have it feel like when you understand what it took to get that scene on film. Essentially, they built a giant centrifuge with all of these different moving pieces. And one of the other things I was really interested in about it is I think we think of the actors in a special effects heavy movie. You think of the stereotype of an actor kind of acting against a green screen with a mop with a wig on it, and they're just going to put everyone else in later. And in this case, Joseph Gordon-Levitt he spent 2 weeks learning how the whole centrifuge set worked and learning how the wires would work so that he would be able to not just go from point A to point B and hit his marks, but to be able to do it fluidly and really to understand how the technology worked. And so it really made him sort of an integral part of the visual effect. So he went beyond just being an actor, and he really was part of what you were seeing.
Yeah,
I think this being like something that was a bit more practical also speaks to the nature of the film, that the posters and the visuals you see in the in the trailer are something that's so mind-blowing that you assume that everything else they're doing is also digital, or in some way obviously it was CG modified if they're removing like wires and things like that, but the practicality of these sets I think is one of the really underrated things about like really real like professional filmmakers that have this love of doing something practically if they can. Like I think of like in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so much of that was just done with just actors in the same room. They're basically the same size, but they're just shot at 25 feet apart with the camera set up a certain way and being foreshortened. And they're all like visual effects. They're all these tricks of the camera and tricks of the eye. And, it's that blending of not knowing what is real, what is CGI, what is, they're all special effects in some manner. It's all just trying to fool the human eye into thinking, oh, I believe everything that I'm seeing within this rectangle.
And I think in something like Inception, the cleverest thing is that multiple techniques were used. Like there is plenty of CGI. There's miniatures. That hospital fortress, destruction is a miniature. The wire removal in the scene that you've mentioned is incredible. I mean, seamless. Sometimes you can sort of feel that there's been something done, but there I couldn't. And then, there's just slow motion photography that's just part of that whole effects side of things. I feel like I want to go out and watch the film again right now.
With that, I think we take you now to the rotunda scene in Jurassic Park. Am I right?
Yeah, that's my fourth one. And just like when I saw the first Brontosaurus, or when I saw that nighttime attack in Jurassic Park, this scene blew me away, because you're super close up on the T-Rex in this sequence. It's just insane. It seems to show that ILM was super confident about what was going on, and so was Steven Spielberg, that they'd be able to pull this off. I don't have necessarily many technical details to share about this scene, but there's a few fun things that people might not already know. I don't know if you go and rewatch the film, there's a point where the T-Rex actually bites one of the raptors, and there's a missing frame. In ILM's render, for some reason, one of the render frames of the raptor disappears, and it actually disappears out of the T-Rex's mouth. So go ahead and rewatch the film and you'll see that in there. That's one cool story. The other thing is that there was this famous blood memo between Steven Spielberg and Phil Tippett, who was, as I said before, a consultant on the dinosaur work. And Phil Tippett is sort of famous creature guy, really wanted some gore and blood in that sequence. And he kept sort of writing to Steve Spielberg via memos and would get these answers back saying, no blood, no gore, And so it was a bit of a to and fro. And I think there is a bit of scratch blood and that sort of thing in the final sequence. But that was something I did write about in one of my befores and afters stories. So look up blood memo, and it's a sort of fun recounting of that with the actual memos as well, which I think is really cool.
I just watched again. I think Chris Corbold, is that his name? Was that did I say the name correctly?
He's a practical special effects supervisor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just watched again Captain America, the first Avenger, the first Captain America film, directed by Joe Johnston, and I didn't know Joe Johnston was an art director, designer on the original Star Wars saga. At least he's credited with creating the designs for the Falcon and for Yoda and for all these different components of that saga.
I'm reading the Rinsler making of Empire Strikes Back right now, and he's all over it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, I was watching Captain America: The First Avenger, and there's so many components of that have the supernatural Nazi kind of stuff that was all over Indiana Jones, and realizing that Joe Johnston has a connection to Lucasfilm and those films so profoundly. I thought that was really neat that some of these creators can put their signature aesthetic and visual imprint on almost everything they do very profoundly. So really cool.
Yeah, I love Joe Johnston's films, and it's kind of cool that he's had a visual effects background. There's a bit of a strong history in visual effects artists or supervisors wanting to get into directing. Not all of them have been successful, but even James Cameron started out as a matte painter, before he became a director. So I think a lot of visual effects people want to be behind the camera.
Yeah, was David Fincher a ILM guy or something?
He was a camera person at ILM as well. That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay, gentlemen. So thank you so much for chatting about this topic. I want to thank our guest Iain Fales. I want to remind people that they can go to beforesandafters.com to find an entertainment storytelling site that uses visual effects as an entryway into fun and compelling discussions about the magic of cinematic visual storytelling, the magic behind it. And it's not just nerdy, green screen stuff about CGI. It's about magic tricks and the visuals that are created by this group of artists that come together to really blow our minds when we sit down and lend our eyeballs to the screen for the story to come alive in front of us. So, Iain, what's up for you? What's anything you want to promote or anything going on right now?
I really love to see films get back into cinemas. Then I'd have more to write about. No, but you mentioned the Patreon. That's really great of you, and thanks for the support. That's been a really fun way for me to connect with readers. And there's a ton of bonus content on there that I also love doing. That if you check out the Patreon, you can see. So
cool.
Cool. I'd love to dig that.
I will say, even though the topic was OMG VFX sequences in films, the time has never been better for VFX in television. And so there's so many great series that Iain covers. There's The Mandalorian. We see stuff about Westworld. We see stuff about a lot of stuff that we see on television. I think you might have covered Doctor Who in the past. I'm not quite sure. It definitely Game of Thrones too. So there's a lot of great stuff to follow that isn't even a movie.
Yeah,
all right, guys.
It's a bit of a golden age, isn't it?
It is. So we're going to move on to the scoring part of it. And Iain, there's a little bit of a tradition. It's not a rule, but somewhat of a tradition that the guest comes in and beats up on our co-hosts and ends up winning. And I got to say that happened again this time. Even though some of your choices were a little bit covered the same film. So you each get points for the bullet time sequences from the Matrix, and you each get points for the choosing Inception. Oh, and you each get points for Jurassic Park. But then I'm going to give Iain the mirror shot from Contact, because I did see that blog entry on Befores and Afters, and I could not, after watching it multiple times, discern where the camera switched or where the composite happened. So it was super cool. So thanks so much for listening. This has been the Mount Rushmore of OMG VFX sequences and films. I, as always, am Jeff.
I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Iain.